Welcome to Stitchery Stories, where textile artists share their life in fabric and thread, inspiration, techniques, disasters and delights. And I'm Susan Reeks, enthusiastic embroiderer and textile art dabbler who also loves podcasting. So take a break and enjoy our light-hearted chat, and please share with your friends so they can enjoy it too. Hello and welcome today to our lovely guest, Sharon Boggon. Hi, Sharon.
Hello.
It's lovely to speak to you today. Now, Sharon's all the way from Canberra in Australia. Thank you to Erica Marsden from New Zealand, who suggested Sharon as a guest. So I'm very grateful because Sharon's a lovely guest. I'm really excited to be speaking to Sharon today. So, Sharon, I have your bio here. We'll go through that and then we'll crack on with your stitchery story.
Okay.
So, Sharon Boggon has been stitching since she was a little girl. She trained in fine arts and applies those skills to contemporary embroidery and crazy quilting. She has taught crazy quilting internationally and online and was a lecturer in the textiles department at the Canberra School of Art at the Australian National University. Sharon has a stitch dictionary of hand embroidery tutorials online and hosts the weekly Take a Stitch Tuesday task challenge. Her book, The Visual Guide to Crazy Quilting Design, Simple Stitches, Stunning Results, shares detailed practical methods about how to design and make a crazy quilt. Her next book, Creative Stitches for Contemporary Embroidery, A Visual Guide to 120 Essential Stitches for Stunning Designs, is out in November. I'm really excited about that, so I'm sure we'll be talking about that as well, Sharon. And as I said, Sharon lives in Canberra, Australia's bush capital, with her husband of 40 years. Really excited to speak to you today, Sharon.
Thanks.
Now, Sharon has got a load of links, okay? She's got a busy Facebook group, she's got various websites, she's on Pinterest, she's everywhere. So all of Sharon's links will be on her episode on stitcherystories.com. That's probably the easiest way to handle all of those fabulous things that Sharon wants to share with us. And I was just going to say, you call it crazy quilting. I think we over here in England, I know it as crazy patchwork, but what do I know about? So crazy quilting, crazy patchwork is where we've got all the different pieces of fabric and then they're all embellished with lovely stitches and so on, yeah?
Yes, I think the American term is crazy quilting and the English is crazy patchwork. And for a long time in Australia, we called it crazy patchwork too.
Okay, we're talking about the same thing, hooray.
Yes, we are. It's the same tradition, and I think in places like South Africa, they call it crazy patchwork as well.
Right, okay, so we'll be talking about that a great deal. There we are, that's all of the admin out of the way. So Sharon, would you like to share with us what you're working on and what's got you excited at the moment?
Well, at the moment, I'm working on two things really. Last year, I proposed what I called the 2020 challenge, which is a crazy quilting challenge. And the idea is that crazy quilters use 2020 items on their quilt.
Oh, wow.
And an item can be different fabric, different thread, different stitches, different patterns, different beads, different lace, different whatnots,
Yeah.
But they can only count whatever once. If you use 3 buttons that are the same, you can only count them once.
Right.
And the idea was to celebrate 2020, which has turned into a very interesting year for everyone. So I've got that on the go.
I was just going to say, I think the idea of a crazy quilt is actually really sums up 2020. It's been a crazy quilt of a year, hasn't it? So well done for you with your crystal ball.
That's right. Yeah, well, but I've got that on the go, which is proving to be a lot of fun. And there's a couple of big crazy quilting Facebook groups and people are beginning to finish up their quilts now, and it's great seeing them. It's such a thrill to see them. Unfortunately for me, when we first went into lockdown, I stitched like crazy. I just sat down and stitched. I thought, whoop-de-doo.
Yeah.
What fun. And my hands sort of packed up for a while. I have trouble with my hands if I stitch too much.
Right.
So I've had to slow down on that for a while, which is a real, blob, because everybody else is finishing their quilt and I'm not. Yeah. So I'm sitting there in the corner with a sulk on my face because my hands are giving me trouble. But the other thing I'm working on is a fabric book, because I like fabric books as well, which is a totally different style. And I recently blogged about it on Pintangle, but if people want to have a sticky beak at the...
Sticky beak, oh, I love it. I love that. Sticky beak, yes. Sorry for interrupting that. People used to say that on Neighbours when I used to watch it in the 80s, and it's like, yeah, sticky beak, I love it. I wish somebody would say sticky beak in a conversation. You've done it, thank you.
I use sticky beak all the time. I used to go, because that's what I am. I'm a sticky beak. When it comes to stitching, I want to see what people are doing.
Yeah, so go and sticky beak on Sharon's blog, because it's brilliant. It's really a lovely blog. Right, carry on, Sharon, sorry.
Yeah, anyway, so I was just going to say that they're the two projects at the moment that I'm enthused about, but I'm sort of with COVID and everything, and the lockdown, and the fact that I have had to sort of slow up on the stitching a little bit. I'm sort of having a bit of a big rethink about what I'm doing with my stitching.
Right,
and we walk every day and we live near a nature reserve.
Yeah,
and I'm just sort of like, I'm finding lots of things to be inspired about that are going in a studio journal.
Right.
Just to catch those ideas while they're in formation. Otherwise I know that in a few months' time I will have forgotten them. So it's just a case of catch them
while you can.
Yeah. So, sort of COVID and everything has made me think about how we use our time, and the long walks in the bush, in the Australian bush, has got me thinking about different ways of stitching as well. So there might be a change. I'm not sure yet. But you never know your luck in the big city.
That sounds really fascinating as well. And I think, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, that this very strange year that we've all experiencing has made lots of people pause for thought for different reasons and different responses to various challenges. So it's interesting that you would say that, that you're expressing that through your stitching. And I think what we'll see over the next few months and into next year as well is this theme of, well, I've changed slightly what I'm doing, or I've changed my approach, or I can see that being a common theme coming forward in just approach as well as subject matter as well. Just love the idea of your crazy 2020 challenge with all those things on it. That's cool. So Sharon, you mentioned there about your online stitch dictionary and your tutorials, and they're kind of inspiring you about your book. And you've also seen there you've got plenty of groups on the go as well. You're very busy online. That's fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah, I've always been busy online. I started what became Pintangle in 2004. I started blogging in 2004. So I've always had an online presence. I've always been interested in how people use technology and how women use technology and how oral traditions, like now stitching isn't an oral tradition, but it almost is, if you know what I mean, in the sense that it was handed down, to generation after generation. And then I sort of felt in the early days of the internet that this was going to be the way that people learnt how to stitch. But at the time, everyone, I think, thought I was a bit mad, but it doesn't matter, because I think
you were right.
I think, well, I mean, it's 16 years later, but I think there are many young stitchers and young women who are learning to stitch just online. They don't know anyone who stitches.
That's so true.
And I think that there's a whole generation of people who are encountering the textile arts. It's not just stitching, it's all of the textile arts. They're encountering them online rather than knowing someone who is who can share their expertise.
Yes, that's a really key point, that actually, because lots of people, I get lots of stories about, we were taught by our grandmas and all this kind of thing. But as you said, there's a whole kind of almost lost generation in the middle there. And now, yes, people they're on Instagram and they're scrolling around and they'll find, because they're maybe looking at plants or yoga or something, and up pops some stitching related to it. So that's a really good point you've made there, Sharon, about people finding stuff online.
Yeah, and so I'll tell you a story. When I usually after an exhibition, whenever I have an exhibition of work, there's always you work really, really hard, and then you exhibit, and it's up on the wall for a week or 2 weeks or whatever, and then there's this slump afterwards.
Yes,
and it can be an emotional slump, and so one of the ways I found to handle that, rather than get a bit depressed, because I used to get a bit down in the dumps at that particular time, there was this anticlimax, was to do something totally different, was to learn, for me it was to learn something new. And I had always taken up things, at that point, that literally I might be feeling exhausted, but it was the week after an exhibition came down. And so in 1996, it was, I had an exhibition, and I decided that I was going to learn this new thing called HTML.
Well done.
And so I sat down and I started teaching myself how to code web pages.
Yeah.
And I was working at an art school at the time, and I thought, oh, okay, you can put images in. I'll put up some of my images, some of my work. And I thought, oh, this is great. This is fun.
Yeah.
And I put up the web page, and of course, nothing happened. Nobody visited.
Nobody was online then.
I know. It was such an anticlimax. And then I thought, oh, okay. Well, I still want to learn how to do this thing. And I knew that in order to learn it, I had to, because this was in the days when there weren't any web page.
No, it was a nightmare.
builders.
No, exactly.
This was a code, It was.
You're talking to a coder here.
Yeah. Well, many of our listeners wouldn't understand what that actually meant. And so I knew that if I wanted to retain this information in my head, I had to use the code, the language. I had to use that all the time. So I thought, okay, what's going to need to be online? And so I started to code directions on how to do stitches.
Fabulous.
And I put up initially 26 stitches, and they were the really basic stitches, and it was in the days where there weren't even digital cameras.
No.
And I used to lay the stitch with the needle positioned. I used to lay the stitch on a scanner and turn it into a GIF, because that's what you did in those days. And that was the way I got my images online, was because digital cameras weren't around in those days.
No.
So anyway, I did that, and I was at the time, there were many, there were Yahoo groups, what were called Yahoo groups.
Yes.
That were very active, and they were email groups. And in the morning, the way they worked was that you would write emails about a topic, like the groups that I were in were Crazy Quilting groups. They were Crazy Patch groups. And so women were online that were crazy quilters back then.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what used to happen is you'd talk in emails. Yeah, but what it meant was that your email inbox was always full of this chatter. Imagine Facebook chatter in your inbox. And that's what Yahoo groups used to be like. Yeah. But they were a lot of fun. It was a new world. Everybody was excited about what they could learn and what they could share. And it was really a wonderful time on the internet. And what I did was I was a member of these Yahoo groups, and some of those women I'm still friends with.
Fabulous.
And I announced that I had written these stitch tutorials. And if people wanted to visit them, they could. And, of course, even then, if there was something online that people really found useful, they would share it with their friends. So it was shared.
Wow.
And I got the positive feedback that meant that I headed even more in that direction towards online life, I suppose you'd call it. And I quickly realised that probably not in that time, but in the future, that this would be the way people would learn to stitch. So that was the start of the Stitch Dictionary Online, and that was the start of my online life.
Brilliant.
And it was really through Stitchery and Crazy Quilting and those Yahoo groups, you know, the women in those Yahoo groups. Some of those women that were in the those groups of that time run Facebook groups today.
Fabulous. So, wow, do you know, this is why I love doing this, because like one random question, I've discovered that you're an internet pioneer and you've been coding, and obviously my background is technology just the same. So, yay. I found a kindred soul. I love doing this.
I don't know about a kindred soul. Sometimes I feel that social media has left me for dead.
Oh, Sharon, absolutely not. So fast forward then, after that pioneering hard work and massive effort, here you are now. As I said, you know, I've spotted that you've got 3 Facebook groups. So you've carried the trend of connecting and the oral aspect and helping other generations to learn and all of those things. You've moved it onto Facebook because they've got all the hard work of coding it all now.
Yes, that's right. We can sit back and have the fun now. Yeah. I mean, I think what it is it's about the community that's online. Many people don't see. They will now because of things like Zoom and because our life has changed so much with COVID, that for many people they're realising that the social aspect of the internet is really important.
Yes, very much so.
But I have always been interested in the way communities function, what a community online can give some people. Yes. Now, a community online is not a substitute for a face-to-face community. A community online can be an addition.
Yes, that's a good point.
Unfortunately, with COVID, it's become a substitute for real face-to-face contact. But I'm not talking about the satisfaction of that, because that's a substitute is not satisfying. I'm talking about when you have a normal social life and an online life. Yes. It can be very rich. Like, so I can go to a quilters group or the Embroiderers Guild or, you know, wherever, friends that I stitch with every fortnight. I can have that social interaction, which is rich and meaningful, and I can have an online life, which is rich and meaningful. Right, and I think some people through COVID are realising that that is possible.
Yes, it definitely opened people's eyes. I mean, I've been working online 10, 11, 12 years now. And, you know, for a long while I was living in Ireland and then France. So I was kind of isolated in a lot of respects. And so for me, the internet starting to expand how it did has enabled me to earn my living. It's enabled me to have those social interactions that were more difficult, because when I went to a face-to-face thing, I was speaking French. You're constantly kind of translating in your head, and it is hard work, pleasurable but hard work. So, you know, I think it's really opened people's eyes, and I've spent quite a lot of time helping people to get themselves on Zoom and take part in things. And even my little Embroiderers Guild group, you know, we've carried on with our meetings. We've moved them online. We've created a format for them, and everyone said, "Oh, do you know, we've really enjoyed doing that." We're all absolutely dying to get back in a room and you know, meet together again. I mean, but we've continued.
That's right. We're social animals, but and so of course we enjoy sort of live face-to-face company, but also there are many people. It struck me in the very early days when I started the blog Pintangle, there was a lady who contacted me at one stage, and she was in outback Australia. You know, now for her to go and get her weekly groceries, she had to drive something like 150 miles.
Oh, it's scary to think about it.
Yeah, and so she was at home. It was a shearing property.
Yeah,
you know, bunch of shearers, but there was no, like, she didn't have a social. She would have had a social life, but not as we know it. You know, and so for her, the online interaction with other stitchers was invaluable. So there's people who are isolated, there's people who for some reason or other aren't as mobile. There's all sorts of reasons why people can take full advantage of and not feel deprived.
Yeah, we were just saying there as well about, you know, Facebook gets a lot of stick really for negativity and all the rest of it, but you know, I found that if I go and join a load of embroidery groups, yours is one of them, and I love your group. We'll just come on to that in a second. But you can train Facebook to only really show you embroidery things, because it goes, she likes embroidery. Oh, I'll show her more embroidery. Yes, please. I don't want to see the rest of the rubbish that you've been showing me. I just want to see nice embroidery. And it's for far more pleasant experience, isn't it?
That's right. That's exactly what I do. Work the algorithm, you know. And they really get enthusiastic if you click on a few adverts that are for needlework stores or something, or wool or something, you know. And, you know, boy, do they get carried away then? You know? Which is fine. It's just fine with me. Everyone says, they've been seeing so much negativity, and I just tell them, just click on whatever interests you.
Exactly.
And ignore all the rest.
Yes.
And, you know, eventually you'll just have a feed of stuff that is tailored for you. Now, that's got problems when it's news, of course, but, you know, because you never see an alternative viewpoint.
Yes.
I will go to a news site for that. You know,
exactly. We can go and look for the other thing that we want somewhere else.
Yes,
that's a good point.
But I'm on Facebook to entertain and follow my interests, and so that's where I keep that stuff. You know.
And so you've got those groups, like your creative embroidery group. Do you want to just spend a couple of minutes, perhaps, Sharon, and explain to us, you know, just your experience, which one's which, and maybe some of the things that you find in terms of how they've grown, or you know, any kind of issues for you, and then we'll carry on with your story as well. So
okay. Well, the creative embroidery group, I started, I can't remember, to be honest. I think it was only about 6 or 8 months ago.
Oh, right, yeah. It's relatively new anyways, you know, less than a year.
Yeah. And, I mean, there's about 8,000 people in that group now.
Wow.
I'm quite fussy with who joins the group.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons is that I sort of, when I started the group, I sort of thought, you know, that there's plenty of stitchers groups, general stitching groups.
Yeah.
But there was none that were for people who designed their own stuff or who wanted to do like freeform embroidery that was just sort of breaking out for the sake of breaking out, you know.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, how do I define creative embroidery? And I defined in the group description you know, someone who designs and stitches their own stuff. You had like that the fact that you weren't stitching a kit or,
yes.
You know, adapting a colouring in-book page or working something out of a book, you know, but you were designing your own stuff. And with that group, that is a key point. And it's been a bit of a sticking issue for some people. They've not liked it when I've removed a post that has, you know, been from a kit or something like that. It's not that I've stitched kits myself. I'm not against
good
kits.
Place. Yeah.
It's just that there's like many groups that are stitch-alongs and, you know, following kits or following some particular designer's kits, or, you know, there's many groups in Facebook. You just have to search in the key that in the search bar there, and they'll come up. And I just wanted a place where people who design could share their work, you know. So it's grown massively. Like during the start of COVID, when it seemed country after country was going into lockdown, I was approving 100 people a day. Honestly, it was taking me all day.
You'll have been thinking, what have I started here?
I mean, I have the 3 questions thing that Facebook does, but I sort of check everybody that comes in the group, mainly because I don't want people selling things and scammers on there and all the rest of it.
No, that's a key point there, isn't it? It's what's the point of the group and managing it so that it stays true to that point.
Yes. And the thing is, I sort of think, well, okay, I give up half an hour every day to approve people and, moderate and things like that. That's time I never get back.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm not there to have some scammer selling sunglasses. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It not only wastes the people who are in the group's time, it wastes my time.
Yeah, and exactly.
I think, I'm sort of quite strict about it, and I'm surprised at how many people enjoy the group because of that,
That is the key point. Yeah, it really is. That makes it a success, doesn't it? Because of the way in which you're investing the time to make it a success for everybody else. Or
make it different from other groups as well. Like otherwise, sometimes you just we were joking around about filling our feed with stitching groups, but I tell you what, they do look the same, many of them.
Yes.
Not all of them, but they,
Yes, yeah.
I mean, it's proved to be very satisfying for me as a result. So I enjoy that. I mean, the other group is same sort of situation with the fabric books.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bookbinding groups and creative and people who bind paper books, you know. And so when I started Fabric Books Up, initially I thought everyone would understand what a fabric book was. Basically, it's a book made out of fabric. But at the very, very beginning, I got a number of bookbinders posting their stuff, and so I thought, I have to really tighten up the description so that people understand that it's not about paper books, it's about fabric books. Because there's plenty of Facebook groups that are for bookbinders, and I mean I'm a member of some of them, and I look at book formats and all the rest of it. I bind my own sketchbooks, so I'm interested in bookbinding. So it's not that I, am against it. It's just that that group was set up for fabric books.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's very, very, very key thing. And then I guess your Take a Stitch Tuesday that follows on with the same idea for your challenge.
Yes. Well, every week I post a stitch, and people in the group stitch a sample. And, I mean, the wonderful thing about that is how people use the stitches in such creative and inventive and interesting ways, And, I mean, I've been doing Take a Stitch Tuesday for a long time now, so every year I sort of think, shall I do it again? Someone emails me and says, are you going to do it again? And I think, yeah. And the thing is, I really do enjoy it.
Yeah, I can tell that.
I started it in 2007.
Oh, crikey.
Yeah, this is an old challenge, So, and you do it year in and year out, and I've tweaked it a couple of times and, now I've got the second stitch in there for people who have done, because initially it used to be just the one stitch.
Right.
And now I've got a simple stitch and a harder stitch.
Ah, good idea, yeah.
And I mean, and I have people come back year after year, and some people just get to do 20 out of the 50, and they come back the following year and they do the next lot. Sort of. And I mean, that doesn't matter to me in the least. And lots of people have said how much it means to them, and how much, how they've learnt embroidery through Take a Stitch Tuesday. And, there's been various groups that have done it. Various guilds around embroiderers guilds around the world have used it.
Yeah.
And,
fabulous.
because I encourage that. I mean, initially, like when I first started that Stitch Dictionary online, it was so that people encountered embroidery. And it's the same with Take a Stitch Tuesday, really. Yeah. It's so that it's a skill that people have to learn, but it's wonderfully satisfying, so that embroidery stays alive. I mean, that was what my initial driver for the Stitch Dictionary, back in those early days when I did the HTML and was on the Yahoo groups and all that sort of stuff. My initial driver was so that embroidery and the tradition didn't die out. Because for a long time people were saying that stuff like that would die out.
It's all going to die out, and here we are. We've got probably more people doing it than ever have been. Certainly for entertainment and enjoyment rather than utility. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we do stitch these days to be creative, and that's wonderful. We're not stitching, I don't know, monograms on stuff that has to be laundered.
So what I really like about this as well, Sharon, leads into, so you've put a huge amount of effort into encouraging people to learn and facilitating that and all the rest of it. And then, of course, you're seeing the creativity of how people use these different stitches, and it kind of feeds itself. And then here we are leading into your next book. And I have to say, I'm really looking forward to this book coming out. We've got a copy of the cover is on your links there.
Yeah.
It's to me, it's like, yes, this is kind of what I'm looking for, because it's how these can look.
Yes. It came out of the Stitch Dictionary that's online. For years, people have said to me, can we please have this in a book? The problem with having what's online in a book is that it won't all fit in a single book. But what I have done is I have totally rephotographed all the step-by-steps. There's about 20 or 30 stitches in there that aren't online.
Right.
So there's a few little pleasant surprises.
Ooh.
And then there's also, when I wrote it, I was really worried about, well, not worried, but, concerned. I didn't want it to be just another Stitch Dictionary.
Right, yes.
With a page and of directions and just that, So what I did was I included lots of samples. They're all freshly stitched samples, so they're not things that people have seen online. So there's loads of new eye candy, which I know stitchers love. They find that inspiring. And then right at the beginning of the book, there's a section of the book where I step people through how to adapt stitches and how to,
what a good idea.
Not only just more or less create their own varieties. I show people how to look at the structure of a stitch and to look for points in the process of creating that stitch where you can adapt and change the stitch.
Right.
So, and I call them play points.
Yeah.
A really simple play point to think about is, buttonhole stitch.
Yes.
And how, I'm sure most listeners would know buttonhole stitch, and how the legs of the buttonhole stitch can be changed in height.
Yes.
And you can space it differently, so you can create patterns with buttonhole stitch. So point where the leg is, I call that a play point. That's something that you can change in that stitch to create something else.
Yeah.
And I point out the play points in the stitches. There's 120 stitches, and I point out how something might be changed, what it might be used for, how to create patterns with it, and I cover things like spacing and height of things and arrangements and, adding beads and adding fringes, and it goes on.
Oh, well, I am absolutely, really, really, really looking forward to getting this book. I tell you that much.
I'm hoping that, like, it is a stitch dictionary, but I'm hoping that section enables people to be inventive and creative and adapt stitches.
Yeah.
For their own use, Yeah, so I'm excited about it because obviously I'm keen to teach people how to be creative with needle and thread. There's nothing wrong with rules, but I'm not exactly stuck to the rules when it comes to stitching. There are many people who had needlework teachers that wrapped them over the knuckles. I was actually expelled from my home science club, which is where we learned to stitch, I mean, so with embroidery, for instance, there's some, if you're embroidering something on a garment, obviously the stitches that you choose and the cotton or the thread that you choose, etc., has to be washable, It stands to reason. It has to be appropriate. If you're hanging something on a wall and if it's an art piece, you've got far more freedom. You don't have to have something that is necessarily going to be able to be boiled. So, there's appropriate and inappropriate usage. But there's no rules these days.
No, not at all. So, I mean, that's all absolutely fascinating, Sharon. Now, I mean, I think as you've been talking, we've covered quite a lot of the things I would normally kind of chat about. But with all of this, what I'm really dying to know as well is, do you have any stories to share with us when perhaps something didn't quite go as planned, and would you have described it as a disaster? And I'm sure you learnt lots from it. So have you got any, surely you must have some funny story for us around there.
Yeah. I suppose there's always disasters. They're just, that's where you learn.
It is.
When it comes to stitching, there's no disasters because you can learn from whatever it is. And to be perfectly honest, even if something goes in the bin, all you're throwing in the bin is a bit of fabric and a bit of thread.
Yeah.
It's not like you're not going to eat for a week.
It's not brain surgery, is it?
Yeah. It's not such a big issue. I think for people who are worried about, like as a teacher, you get people who are very worried about not being able to do something, not being up to standard or whatever. And as a result, because it's actually a type of perfection that they expect of themselves, and as a result, they don't try things.
Yes.
They don't give it a go. And I always say to them, well, what have you got to lose? You've got a bit of fabric and a bit of thread to lose, but you've got everything to gain, because you can learn something. But at the same time, in some ways, those people, they do have something to lose in the sense that what they have to face is their expectations. And not meeting those expectations can be hard. I understand that, and the internal critic and all that. But really, I just try and encourage people to let go of those expectations, let go of that expectation of perfection, and give something a go, Now, you asked me about a disaster story, and I'll tell you one. When I was very much younger, and it was not long after I graduated from art school, so I was in my 20s, I encountered my first crazy quilt. And thought, oh, wow, this is great stuff,
Yeah.
A beautiful thing. Of course, I was very sure of myself, and I thought, well, I've been trained. I should be able to do this quite easily. And I attempted it. First time round was a disaster. It was such a mess. You've got no idea. I threw it in the bin. I thought, okay, I'll just give this another go. I've been trained, so I should be able to do this.
Round the circle again.
Yes. I threw 3 pieces in the bin before I sort of really looked at what I was doing, and I started to apply the compositional rules of painting to a block. So I started thinking in terms of leading the eye around a block, of actually, instead of just chucking everything at it and expecting it to look pretty, it was just a mess. So I started to structure Crazy Quilt block the way you would an image, In other words, I did apply what I had learnt.
Yes.
But I had to go through 3 disasters, which weren't disasters, because they were learning, I learned something very valuable.
Yeah.
And so in many ways, it was the best disaster I ever had, because the complexity of crazy quilting has kept me interested all these years. It was a gift, really.
Yes, totally. Oh, I love
because
that.
I've always been fascinated with balancing this thing against that thing, and put the 2 things too close together or on top of one another or whatever. You use them in a way that is insensitive, and you've got a mess. But just pull them apart a bit and balance things out a bit, and you've got something that is interesting to look at, visually interesting to look at.
I'm sure there's loads of light bulbs gone off in heads at that statement there, Sharon. Thank you for sharing it with us. Because and I'm sure lots of others do, we look at things and go, wow, that's brilliant. And then we try and that's what we do. We just throw whatever we've got. Right, just all they've done is just throw it all on there and stitch it down. But no, there has been composition and planning and moving things around. And so, when we say, oh, God, mine just looks a mess. Well, that's because I didn't really sit and think about any kind of composition. I just kind of assumed that we just throw it on there and it'll all look lovely. And no, it doesn't. I'm so pleased you shared that with us.
Well, anyone that, that's what my first book was about, was the design, was how to apply design principles effectively to crazy quilting so that you had control over it. Because really, crazy quilting is wonderful in the sense that you've got so many elements, you've got so many different colours, you've got different textures, you've got things that are bright, things that are dull, you've got lace, you've got buttons, you've got beads, you've got everything, and it's all on an 8-inch square, and you sort of think, oh my goodness,
it's not for the minimalist in us, is it? Do you know
no,
what I mean?
No. There's no less is more in crazy quilting. It's more is more.
More is more, yeah. As long as you've got a plan for it. Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. So balancing it it's a fascinating challenge and fun. I found it immensely fun. And, of course, the community of crazy quilters that are online, I now have known many of them for over 20 years.
Yeah, wow.
I've had such rich friendships from these women.
Yeah.
And, I mean, also just having those connections have led me to teach overseas, in America, and I've had the opportunity of publishing the book, of having the books published. I was thrilled to have that opportunity without being online and without blogs and without the social media and all that sort of stuff. I would have never had those opportunities.
Yeah.
I was born in a very isolated city in Australia, which is Perth. It's sort of one of the most isolated cities in the world.
It is.
Nobody would have seen what I was doing, if it wasn't for an online presence.
Yeah, and that's the crucial point here, Sharon, is that you've looked around, seen your circumstances, thought, right, I'm stuck here in the middle of nowhere, what do I do?
Yeah.
You've embraced technology as you've seen it coming, you've embraced the community side of things, and here you are. And I just think inspiring for anybody. And I know that people still, I don't really want to do online, and I feel a bit scared and all the rest of it. Just go for it. You'll all be sick of hearing me say this, but it's true. And every guest says, this has such a fabulous story about using the online world that we've been gifted with to add to our online world. And, the world is our oyster. We can do what we want now, can't we?
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously you have to work it, but the opportunities you get back are pretty good. I'm not unhappy with what I've managed to achieve.
So so many things in there, highlights, and I know if you go look on Sharon's blog, it's just brilliant anyway, going through things. And so as we kind of wrap up today, Sharon, because we could be here all day, I know, kind of looking forward, obviously you've got your book coming out. Have you got any other things that you want to share with us as we wrap up for today?
No, it's mainly the book from a sort of, because it comes out in November.
Right.
There'll be quite a bit of activity for that. And I mean, the other thing is that I want to think about this 2020 year and COVID and all that. I'm not saying I'm going to change my stitching or anything, but I think I might be heading off in another direction, which is sort of interesting, but I don't know quite.
Yeah, so we'll have to keep our eyes peeled for what Sharon's up to next as well. Then, so get the book out of the way, and then your brain's free again, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Sharon, this has been absolutely fabulous. I've scratched the surface, I know, of the conversation that we could have. Just thank you so much for sharing some really, really great insights there and some fabulous advice for us all. And I just love your story. And the kind of more questions I've asked, I've just got like sucked in more and more and more. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you, Erica, for suggesting you as a guest as well.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Sharon.
Thanks.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, then please join the Stitchery Stories fan club so you can get an email when a new episode is released. It's a quick and easy way of listening and of keeping up with any news and information around this podcast. Please visit stitcherystories.com. Of course, you can listen to Stitchery Stories on plenty of podcast apps at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify and plenty more besides. You can also ask your smart speaker to play Stitchery Stories podcast too. But wherever you listen, why not leave us a rating and a review to encourage other people to listen too? I very much appreciate you taking the time to do that for me. So that is the end of our Stitchery story for today. Keep stitching, keep smiling and keep creating your very own Stitchery Stories.